Hey guys, welcome to LexDiscussCafe, the podcast where we dive into the world of law, innovation, and business strategy. Today, we have a truly inspiring guest joining us, Ryan Mendonca. Ryan Mendonca is not a typical lawyer. With a decade of experience under his belt, Ryan has carved out a unique niche as a virtual legal counsel, digital nomad lawyer, and fractional general counsel. He is a top decision making voice in the field of merger and acquisitions and a trailblazer in remote legal services. Ryan has provided invaluable legal guidance to businesses across the globe. Buckle up as we explore his journey, insights, and the future of legal tech. Let's give a warm welcome to Ryan. So, Ryan, welcome to Let's Discuss Cafe.
Thank you, Avinash. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, actually. Looking forward to an interesting conversation.
You're quite humble. So, let's jump right into it, right? You definitely have a very interesting profile, interesting personal life and professional life. I think when people will hear about your professional life, they will definitely envy that because at least I did when I heard your story for the first time. So tell us from ab initio your personal story.
Sure. So, my story starts from being, born and raised in Dubai. Lived most of my life there. Studied law in India in Bangalore. Was super interested in intellectual property. Started working at a IP boutique law firm. Learned a lot about trademarks, copyrights, designs, contracts for franchising, merchandising agreements, things of that nature. And then slowly wanted to start working in different fields, right? Use my legal degree to other fields of law. So I started with a startup in the legal space. I was working with them, drafting all of their contracts and agreements. They were technically kind of like a rocket lawyer of sorts, and I worked with them for a while. Post that, worked with the...
What was the name of that startup?
So that wasn't my startup, but that was a startup that I worked for. It was called LegalTech.
Yeah. LegalTech. Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So LegalTech, it essentially was like an end-to-end solution for various agreements or affidavits, things that you needed signed, notarized, stamped, franked, all of those sort of things, right? So we had different draft templates like a licensing agreement or a franchise contract or a lease and license agreement, things like that, right? We drafted all of these. It was all on a platform. People could fill out those forms. Those forms would then translate into agreements, get printed, stamped, notarized, signed by the parties, and then given back to both of them. So sort of an end-to-end solution of that.
So what was your client division? Like, did you had majority of Indian clients or where you had clients from outside India as well?
It was mainly B2C, right? So a lot of the customers that were coming were Indian customers because a lot of the templates were Indian templates or, based on various state laws and things like that.
That's really interesting. Then how did you proceed further?
So post that, I started working with a US law firm that had some operations in India. I dealt with their attorneys as well as their clients by making sure we have the right information about the client, about the case, vetting all of that information with like proofs, documents, and also then managing the discussion of whether this is a client we wanted to take up or not, because this was a company or a law firm that operated in the personal injury space. So we had to weigh whether these clients were meritorious to take up as a client on a case, right? The next was when I moved back to Dubai. So I worked as an in-house counsel. This was my first more defining or changing my career path, right? From private practice to in-house. I was FMCG conglomerate, actually. They operated in about 50 odd countries, had 5 factories globally, about 25 retail outlets in different airports and duty frees. I was basically their in-house legal team, and it started and ended with me. But what was good was because they were so international in their operation, it allowed me to essentially understand various laws of those countries that I needed, right? Because we had to understand like how joint ventures worked in, let's say, certain parts of Africa, right? We had to learn about how an acquisition happens in like the Maldives, for example, right? So we had different interesting projects. I was on any given point in time at like on 7 different projects, something in Russia, something in India, something in Brazil. So it was very enterprising and informative. And they had about 40 companies. So it gave me the understanding of having structures in Dubai, US, Singapore, BVI, Hong Kong, Panama, things like that made sense for different organizations, right?
Yeah, that's again interesting
Yeah.
career choice. Then tell us, what are you doing right now?
So actually, between that and what I'm doing now, I was with CultFit, which is a brand that a lot of Indian in fitness enthusiasts and in general startup enthusiasts would have heard of. So I was with them as their legal counsel for the UAE expansion. It started and again ended with me, but there was a big team of lawyers in-house in India, and it was an incredible journey. Learned a lot, played different hats as you would have at a startup, and it allowed me to basically experience what it was to work at like a high-tech VC-backed startup, right? And now I'm in the health and fitness space, so it was interesting. We opened about 7 fitness centers in 9 months. Unfortunately, we had to close them down, but I stayed on to help with all of that as well. So that was interesting at the same time. First,
Yeah,
once in a lifetime sort of experience, I would
yeah.
say.
One of the interesting thing about your career was digital nomad. The term digital nomad and lawyers usually don't go together, right? So tell us, how did you manage to combine these two things?
So, well, I find traveling and, working remotely do actually go hand in hand, right? Because if you're a virtual legal counsel like I am, right, then you will enjoy traveling, right, for the most part, right? Because you will want to be in different places and network with multiple clients in different jurisdictions, right? But because they're in different time zones, these clients, right, it is quite challenging, I would say, right? And as a virtual legal counsel, the key to managing legal consultations is probably with various client relations, right? Being on the move, being mobile, being always approachable and accessible is super important, right?
Right. So tell us what you can share, but how many international clients do you have currently whom you're serving as a virtual legal counsel?
So there's multiple, I would say, at any given month on month, because we do have monthly plans versus retainers that most law firms or companies would have. So with us, we have about 4 different companies that have come on as for the big virtual legal counsel plans, right? And they move up and down on month to month. Sometimes you have 5, sometimes you have 6, but it's anywhere between that 4, 5, 6 average range.
Really interesting. So this concept of, fractional general counsel, right? You are doing that virtually, but the concept of that a single lawyer is not just associated with one company, but a lot of companies, right? This is gaining a lot of popularity. And we actually, our second or third podcast was with a guy named Pat, amazing guy. He's also in the same area. So tell us how this business model or how this service delivery benefits startups and small businesses, and how does it differ from traditional in-house counsel roles?
Okay. So first and foremost, it's important to understand what a fractional general counsel does, right? So fractional GCs typically will interact with various heads of departments, right? Like your finance, your marketing, production, in certain cases, your tech team, right? And it's essential that when you're thinking about fractional general counsels, you think about them primarily working with startups and small to medium businesses, because sometimes they require a legal counsel, but not necessarily someone who's full-time, right? So it may be a requirement that they have once in a while, but it's important that they have somebody that sees it from the inside, right? Ultimately, I feel that the business of our client and understanding their space is what's important, right? And being able to bring their vision to a reality, of course, within the confines of the law, is our job or our duty.
Wow, that's a great way to explain your job. But Ryan, tell me about this thing, right? What I've seen from the experience is that this is my observation on US startups. When they reach a point that they have somewhere around 50 to 60 employees, they hire their first full-time in-house counsel, right? This is what I've usually observed. So in your experience, what is the revenue metric or employee numbers that a startup or a mid-sized company has reached when they should start thinking about hiring a fractional GC?
So fractional GCs and a full-time in-house, like you mentioned, are two different things, because fractional GCs offer startups and small businesses that flexibility, right? But at the same time, they bring that in-house counsel experience, right? And this model provides that flexibility and cost effectiveness, which allows businesses in their early stages, right? Between, let's say, 1 to 2 employees who've just started out, or, 1 to 2 co-founders that are even starting out, right? All the way till maybe, they have a 20, 30-person team, right? Because it basically means that you have a legal counsel that's not actually part of your payroll, but comes and goes as and when required. And this differs from traditional roles, right? Because traditional roles, you have to have that lawyer sitting in your office or, on your payroll, irrespective of you having certain needs or the business, not performing as well, right? So in that initial years, you need that flexibility and you need to have a solution or basically a service provider, right, that comes with expertise.
Yeah. So essentially you are saying, like, it doesn't matter how small you are. From the day one, you should think about hiring a fractional GC.
Yeah. Actually, because see, think about it, right? Let's say you and I were to start a business together, right? You bringing your legal tech, me bringing my legal experience, right? And we formulate some sort of, let's say, app or startup or whatever, right? Now, we would need a co-founder agreement. We would need a company to be set up. We most likely would want our trademark to be registered or our logo to be registered. All of these things, whilst yes, you can go to various service providers for various things, right? It's always best to have that one person in the office or in the, peripherals who can just say, yes, I'll get this done, I'll get that done, this is done that way.
Yeah.
A whole way around.
Right. See, this is exactly the pain point I wanted to kind of discover, because, I know a lot of startups in that stage, right? So usually what they do is they hire expert in every domain, right? So if they want to get a company incorporated, they will hire a lawyer. If they want hire someone, hire their couple of employees, they will get a lawyer specializing in that. If they have to get an IP registered, they will get a lawyer for that, right? So this is what they initially do, right? So my question was that why is it better for them, right? Besides having just one point of contact, right? Why is it better for them to get a fractional GC at that point of time vis-a-vis hiring independent legal consultants in the initial stages to get exactly what they want to get done?
So that's perfectly fine if you know what needs to be done, right? Then you can always go to like, for example, if you know you need to set up a company and it needs to be an LLP or a private limited, right? Then you can go directly to a CA or a company secretary that will help you with that, right? At the same time, your trademark needs to be registered. You find a, IP agent or IP lawyer that helps you with this and registers your trademark, right? But ultimately having that one person that knows who to go to, how, which class, what type of contracts, multiple things, right? That's why it's important to have a fractional GC that has experience in different fields, but mainly corporate law, right? So somebody that understands intellectual property, compliance, has an expertise in contract management. These are things that you would look out for, right? Fractional GC.
Very interesting. And you made a valid point there. But if you just think from a US point of view, right, what I have observed from a lot of friends is that especially California is designed this way that everybody, even lawyers, just wants to get you started. And until unless you start making money, nobody really charges you anything, right? Especially in California, they have this concept of payment deferral, right? Where they won't be charging you any money until unless you raised your first price round, right? Now, compare that with a fractional GC, right? I'm not sure whether the same rule applies for IP and workman comp as well. But for getting incorporated for the initial basic services, especially in the US, a lot of lawyers are willing to do that for free unless you give them a guarantee that if you ever raise money in the future, you will hire them and at that time they will be paying. Right now those startups are facing a confusion, right? Why should I hire a fractional GC right now, which most probably will not give me such concession in terms of payment, right?
So there's a couple of ways to approach this, right? One is a lot of times I and other fractional GCs that I've spoken to or that interacted with and had the pleasure of understanding how they operate, right? Do tend to take equity, right? After a certain period or, when either of them or both of them are comfortable, right? So that's one way that they sort of defer payment in the similar manner, right? By taking equity versus that. Right? The other aspect that I've seen is doing this deferral payment, right, only means that your $800 an hour session that is not being paid now is going to be paid later, right? Versus not having an $800 an hour session, right? And using that $800 to maybe, draft and review certain contracts that and you're talking to the lawyer already needs, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting because obviously they will give you payment deferral, but the pricing they have is
Still almost the
expensive.
same. Right. Yeah.
It's a lot more expensive, right? So I can tell you in my own case, we paid close to 3,000. Like we didn't pay abhi tak, but we have been charged close to $4,000 for basic company incorporation, right? Yeah, I know it's expensive, right? So
Yeah.
that will be due when we raise our first price round.
But in the inverse, just to compare, if you did any of these three models, right? One, using some service provider, just like how we have here in India filings or, Vakil search, right? There you have State Farm, you have like firstbase.io, Doula. There's multiple service providers in the similar space, right? So if you were to set up a Delaware, Wyoming C Corp, you could do that for under $500, right?
I would say $500 plus, because this is something I've gone through quite intimately. So $500 plus filing fees. That
Yeah.
is like the average pricing I discovered.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other way is you find a registered agent just by, going on Google, searching Delaware, whatever, right? And you'll find multiple of them, right? They'll have their own anywhere between, 6 to 800 on the higher side, 1,200, all inclusive package, for example. And then the other way is you approach a fractional GC, somebody like us, and we already have the hookup, I would say, with a registered agent that's done multiple companies with us before. And, we have a different price that makes sense for the client, right? Who just wants that quick one-off company to be set up, right? And that's about it, right? It's very different if they want, an ESOP pool, they want, let's say, to do their first fundraise with equity and things of that nature, then it can get complicated and get more expensive, right? But otherwise, it's very much lower or comparable, right? Not in comparison, actually, to that 4,000 number that you're going to have to pay. So it's probably a good option to have, especially if you are maybe in the legal tech space, right? So do you want to have a big law firm or a good name law firm backing you in terms of your legal, right? Especially when you're investor facing, right? You'll say, X, Y, and Z law firm represents us in the US, right? Versus either a no-name fractional GC, or at the same time, maybe some random startup that helps, set up companies and do few things, right?
No, we have never used the name of the law firm, and honestly, out of ethical concerns, because we had this conversation earlier as well, because we were in a legal tech space. So we had a interest that there has to be some provision of conflict of interest if we ever decide to sell our products to the same law firm that is representing us, because this was a peculiar situation, like because we were in legal tech space, and also we need to hire lawyers for doing XYZ. And to be fair, I don't think it will attract a lot of merit, because every lawyer understands that if you pay someone well, you can get whatever law firm to represent you, right? As long as you are willing to pay and there's no conflict of interest, right? Something I forgot, in this 4,000, we got our ESOP pool also set up, because ESOP was very core to our DNA, right? So we got that as a setup as well. And there were a couple of other things we got. So yeah, not going into the detail, but it was...
But that probably makes sense.
Right. It wasn't like a typical formation, right? So that's why bill was a little higher. Like usually if you go for a typical, I think even if for a good named law firm, you can get it done on a payment deferral system around $2,500, right? That would be like normal estimate for 2024. So yeah, points that you raise, the points are quite valid. But I have this advice for startups is that initially don't focus too much on legal, right? The first priority is finding product market fit, finding, whether you have a sustainable sales marketing channel or not.
Building a product, first of all, right?
For
Focusing on a product, right?
And legal should be within that list, but it should be always the top 5, but never top 3, right? Priority of a startup. That's what my advice to most of the startup is. So my question to you is, what key legal areas startups should prioritize in their initial days? For instance, their first couple of years of incorporation.
So what they should prioritize, right? I would say if they're a tech startup or a business that has some unique intellectual property, they should focus on registering that, right? First of all, finding out what their IP is, and then going ahead and building a strategy to protect it by various registrations. The other aspect I would say is have someone who's experienced at drafting contracts or reviewing contracts, negotiating contracts, and does all of the contract management bit, right? So I'd say that's the second aspect or area that startups need to prioritize. And yeah, of course, compliance, right? So if there's a certain space in which you're working, right? Let's say it's the food tech, or let's say it's in, EV, right? You need to understand what are the laws that you are going to need to comply to, as well as certain laws that you need to understand how to work around them, right? Because it's important that you work with the law versus, against the law, right? So that you have a clean sheet in terms of your compliance.
Well said, Ryan. Since we're talking about technology, I wanted to get your thoughts on the recent boom in legal technology space, right? Especially when ChatGPT came out, you saw, right? There was a lot of startups who are trying to solve various legal problems in a unique way. I'm also one of them, right? So what are your thoughts on this? How do you see technology transforming how legal products and services are delivered in the next decade?
So that's a fantastic question, I feel, because in the next decade, I feel, legal tech is going to be a game changer, right? It will or alter the way how we approach law, right? Now that there are multiple tools, not just for, legal drafting or let's say even contract negotiations, right? You have multiple tools to do multiple legal ancillary things, right? But I feel legal tech has the potential to be truly revolutionary once it comes into the space of um, actual litigation, right? So if judiciary and litigation are using it, right, either to review and create, case summaries, for example, right? Or you have various online platforms, right, for research, right, that can be AI enabled. There are multiple really good service providers, right, that do legal research with the aid of AI. So I feel, in short, that traditional legal services have been, more expensive and complex, especially if you're comparing it to like law firms that do hourly billing, have rigid working structures, right? The average person might shy away from even considering like using legal help, right? That is available, right? Because of the cost, right? So I feel AI or technology in AI in legal, right, is definitely going to democratize legal, right? It will bridge that gap between various offerings that are there right now, right? And the capacity of people to have it, right? Maybe initially you have clients that are in the US, you have clients that are abroad that value legal systems and also embrace technology. But sooner or later, you will have or you will reach a critical mass where, even the small startups and small mom and pop shops, right, will use a legal tool instead of a physical lawyer, right, that's around their office or in their vicinity.
Yeah, very interesting. Your thoughts are quite valid, but as someone who is selling legal AI services, the internally contradicting concept of selling legal AI services, let me explain that first. So the concept is that a lawyer is valued as expensive as he or she is. Very good example. You take Harish Salve versus a lawyer in T. Sazari, right? Even though you have no clue about the legal system, his or her knowledge, Hari Salve sir is charging this much, and this guy is won't be able to charge that much in a year, right? As a lawyer, your reputation is a lot of times tied up with how much money you are charged, right? So that's point number one. Now, when AI tool or well, technology tool comes in, that says that okay, I can increase your efficiency, right? I can improve your benefit, right? So first of all, the lawyer, especially in the litigation space, the problem they have is that, if I use this tool, how will I honestly say to my client that I have spent 10 hours on this and that's why you should pay me, this much money, right? Point number one. And the second point is that if I use these AI tools, essentially my billing goes down. So my reputation also goes down, right? And a follow-up question is, a lot of times people say, okay, your efficiency will increase, so you will be able to add more clients. So now the partner says that's most of the time is not the case, right? There are very few lawyers who are saying no to work. And a lot of times they also say that's a good position to be in because that's like, that saves my reputation. So giving this context, my question is, how do we pitch AI tools that actually benefit the customer, makes legal services less expensive, but it is actually contradictory to the interests of the lawyers who will be essentially using these products and services?
So ultimately, it depends on what the tool or service is, right? And how the service provider is helping, right? Because you can either make things quicker, right? Or you can make things more accurate, right? You can enable efficiency, right? So ultimately, if the client or your client, right, is going to be charging their client, right, by the hour, then it's going to make it a lot difficult for them to establish, right, how they're doing, they're taking as much time as they are, right, by using AI, right? Because ultimately things should shorten down. Right? That's why what I've done and what we do is moved away from hourly billing, right? And it's actually something that I was, thinking about the other day, that ultimately hourly billing is going to become a thing of the past, right? Uh, People will value work getting done, right? Work getting done right the first time, right? And within a agreed upon time frame, right? So instead of it taking 17 hours, right, to do something, right? If it could be done in 7 hours or 3 hours, right? Wouldn't you still want to pay the same amount? Because ultimately, the work that is getting done, right, is just being shortened in a shorter span of time, right? So efficiency is improving, but pay is going to get hampered. That's not how it works, right? Because ultimately, it's whether the client prioritizes it to come to the work to getting done in a shorter span of time, or the client prefers you taking longer, right? And putting more effort into it, right? And ultimately taking the time that it takes to get something done, right? Versus doing it in the shortest and most efficient manner.
Right. And see, this is what I see. A lot of times clients don't even understand how much work is gonna go into this particular legal task that I am, giving to an external counsel or to my someone in my legal team, right? Now the question is that, at some level, it's easy to say that, the hourly billing is going to be thing of the past. And that has been true, I would say. Slowly and steadily, the instances of hourly billing are decreasing. But I'm telling you from my practical experience, hourly billing are usually done proactively rather than retroactively. It's not happens is that, this is in my limited experience, is it doesn't happen that, okay, the lawyer is tracking down every minute that he's doing work and that, then adding it to it, right? So when a task comes in, lawyers have an idea, okay, how much this task is going to get, right? And they will build somewhere around, even though in reality the time spent by their junior or somebody else is on a different range, right? So the thing is that even in hourly billing, they know what is the fair amount I should be charging, and a lot of times they do that, even though, like, you spend a couple of hours more on sometimes, or sometimes you spend a couple of hours less than what is the estimate, right? So in a way, it's already happening that lawyers are charging a fair amount. Okay, I'm going to do this work in 7 hours. So this is the amount of time I'm going to send to the lawyer, right? So don't you think like this is exactly what you guys are also doing right now?
So to answer your question, right, in terms of lawyers or professional service providers and various other professions as well, right? Like you have software development people, right? They also charge by the hour, right? You have maybe marketing agencies, right, who do various consultancies and pitch decks and so on and so forth, right? A lot of them also charge by the hour, right? So any service that does charge by the hour, right, and has clients on a, let's say, monthly retainer of X number of hours, right? So that client knows in a year they have to have, let's say 100 hours, right, to be consumed by this service provider. Right? Now, if they, which is that client, right, could use a tool, right, enabling themselves to bring that 100 hours to maybe 50, 40, right? That's all that they need, an external human expert to deal with other things, right? Whilst these tools, these technology that LegalTech is basically making, they can subscribe to those and they can reduce the number of hours that they go to an external counsel for. Would you not want an external counsel, or would you as an external counsel not want to have access to or embrace that legal technology that somebody else could go out and in the free market, go out and get?
Right. But that's what I'm saying. It's against my interest, right? Because if I'm doing that work in 50 hours, I should be billing less, right? And that's again, which lawyer would want to decrease their revenue, right? Even in law firms, right? Every associate is under the pressure to bill as many hours as possible, right? So that's what I feel that, how to, until unless it is mandated by client or until unless they have this risk that their client will leave if they are not providing the services on this price point, they are under a normal outside counsel is under no pressure to reduce, to increase his or her efficiency, because that will lead to its, shorter, lesser billable hours, and as a result, lesser revenue.
See, so there's very few ways of tracking and actually measuring what that hourly billing looks like, right? Like I was in-house, I would get an email with an invoice saying this transaction, this email, this call, this whatever, right? These many minutes, hours, whatever. And there was a total, and that was the bill, right? Now there's no way to verify, right, whether it took 45 minutes for somebody to send an email, right? Or the only things you can verify are the calls or meetings, because those will be dated, time-stamped, all of that. Now, when it comes to a document, right, you're not going to be able to tell how long that person has actually spent on a document, right? So those are always more or less estimates, right, of the time that it should take, right? It's rarely that it is actually tracked, right, on somebody's screen, how long somebody has been working on a document or not, right?
Now, a lot of clients are actually insisting on that too.
There are ways now with
Right.
or with tech in general,
Right. So
track
again,
how long a document has been edited for,
right.
has been open for since it's moved from one level to another.
So see, in that realm, like, clients are already insisting on that, in a way, even though we know in practice, it is done a lot of time retrospectively, right, rather than actually tracking the time. But if the client insists, technically, an external counsel should be able to justify, okay, this was open and this much time, this was retained. And that's what I feel, right? As an in-house counsel, definitely you have incentives to use technology because your salary isn't tied up to the amount of work that you are doing, right? The work comes in, now you have to get it done, right? Because the deals are on the line. There's so many things online, right? So your salary will remain the same, right? But as an external counsel, that's not the case. Sure. Okay, moving on. Now let's have the rapid fire round. Let's bring a fun segment. Now, the first rapid fire question is, what's your favorite legal thriller book?
It's hard to say favorite, but I like The Rainmaker by John Grisham.
Oh, wow. Nice.
The Lincoln Lawyer, that also got turned into a movie and a book and a show. And
yeah. Nice choice. Moving on. Next question is, if you could have a legal debate with any historical figure, who would it be?
I don't know if you count as historical, but probably Dr. Abdul Kalam. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. One legal myth you would like to debunk for our listeners.
Okay. So probably the myth that contracts need to be, filled with all these legal jargons and, whereas and here too and all this fancy, fluffy language, right? That half the time people that are signing these contracts don't even understand, right? Is necessary for this contract to be valid or be enforceable, which is not the case, right? Contracts, even when they're in reality written clearly in simple language and understandable, right? It can even actually strengthen the contract, right? By ensuring that people understand what their rights, what their obligations are, versus being clueless about what's actually written in the document, what they've signed up for.
Well, yeah, great answer. Now the next and last rapid fire question is, What's your go-to productivity hack?
Well, so I would say it's like compartmentalizing my day, right? Giving various time blocks where there's a burst of time where I'm just doing emails. There's a point in time where I'm just doing back-to-back calls, right? There's a point in my day when I'm actually reviewing contracts, reviewing articles, getting things text-wise reviewed and revised. So that would be my productivity sort of hack, right? Compartmentalizing your day and clubbing things that are similar.
Right. Great answer. So, as we are towards the end of the podcast, I'll ask you your parting thoughts on we have so many young professionals who want to pursue a career, who wants to become a virtual legal counsel like you for Indian and foreign clients. What would be your single advice to them?
So I would say if I had to say it in one word, maybe time, right? And then you can extend that to you have the advantage of time because you're young, right? You have a lot of time to learn things, to taste things, to build your interests, and at the same time a skill map, right, of various things that interest you and that you're good at, right? And you can also say that it'll take a lot of time to get things where you have the experience, you have the understanding, and also in terms of time, you need to understand that you always need to be constantly learning, right? Just because you've spent 5, 10, 20, whatever the amount of time that you've spent, right, in the legal career, right, does not necessarily mean that you're done with learning, right? So I would say this one thing is
Right. Great advice. One of the things that I also wanted to ask, like you were lucky enough to be being born and brought up in Dubai and relocate to a jurisdiction where, you have so many companies who are working or, offering their products and services in multiple jurisdictions. If somebody doesn't have that luxury, right, how sitting in India, they can have that global exposure?
so. There's a couple of ways, right? Or actually 3 ways. One, you can obviously look at a certain jurisdiction that you would like to either relocate to, like get a license there, do your, the full shebang, right? Go to Australia, do your JD or do a master's in the US, whatever the case may be, right? Get your dual license, start working there. And that's one way, right? The other way is, of course, going to a country where it's not necessary that you have a local qualification to practice law there or to work in companies there, which wasn't the requirement in Dubai or UAE, right? The other aspect is, the other way you could do this is from your laptop, like I do, right? Have clients from different countries that approach you because if you look at it, a lot of the law or the legal space, right, the concepts are the same. It's just the application of it that changes jurisdiction-wise. So data privacy is data privacy. If you're talking about a SaaS contract or a master service agreement, those are global sort of contracts, right? But there are certain laws that are relevant to these laws or are connected, right? Maybe it's consumer protection law. Maybe it's law regarding IT and how IT service contracts need to be executed, right? So there are various local aspects, but that's something that you can either pick up, right, over time, or that is something that you can outsource or have a legal counsel there to support you and mentor you and validate certain things that you do.
Wow, great advice there, Ryan. So thanks a lot for joining us on Let's Discuss Cafe.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. And that wraps up another insightful episode of Let's Discuss Cafe. A huge thanks to Ryan for sharing his incredible journey and expertise with us today. From pioneering virtual legal counsel services to his innovative approach in merger and acquisitions, Ryan's work is truly reshaping the legal landscape. If you want to learn more about Ryan's services or connect with him, be sure to visit www.yvlc.legal. And you can also follow him on LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with leading voices in the legal world. Until next time, stay caffeinated, stay curious. This is your host, Avinash Tripathi, signing off.